Okay. Good evening. What a great time. Um, if you're joining us for the first time, greetings. Um, you should consider liking and subscribing, taking a look back. If this is your first video that you're watching, you should take a look back. We've been on quite the journey. This is like episode 28, I think, 27, 28. Anyway, what, Jonas? 29. Yeah, he says 29. I'm pretty sure it's like 26. So, uh, we've been quite a ways. The last few weeks, we're on this journey through the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy, which we're going to review over the next couple of weeks. But as we understand the desert, like we really need to understand this call of God that we miss from time to time. This call of God from the land of plenty. We look back at our conversation through the book of Exodus and the beginning, especially the beginning of the book of Exodus, and you have to understand that the people of God were in this oasis of a place. They were in the land of Goshen, which is northern Egypt, the Nile River Delta, which is the most fertile land in all the world. So they are farming and caring for their animals in the most fertile land on on the face of the earth, even to this day. It floods every season. In its season, they were used to traveling around, and God says, "Hey, I want you to leave this place." And just like most of us, we give the people of Israel a bad rep, and we're like, "Well, they should have followed God. They should have followed God. They were just being disobedient." But the reality is, most of us find ourselves in the same place, don't we? Like things are going really, really well, and God says, "Hey, it's time to leave." We want to argue with God and be like, "Are you sure? Because this is really nice." I mean, I've been there personally multiple times. Things have been going really well in my life. Things have been very profitable or very easy or very sustainable. And all of a sudden, God's like, "Hey, it's time to change." And I'm like, "Well, but I like what I'm doing. This is really comfortable." And what we miss is that the God of the Bible often calls us away from that. He often calls us away from a place that's comfortable for us, not because that place is necessarily bad for us, but because that he wants to be more intimate with us. He wants to be closer to us. And so he called his people from this place of plenty out into the desert. And he fought hard to get them there. He fought so hard to get them there and draw them close that he made a wedding ceremony, put together a wedding ceremony with them there in the desert at Mount Sinai. And on the backside of that wedding, he he consummated this marriage with them. And that consummation in the Eastern wedding is consummated in blood, and that was done through the tabernacle and the institution of the tabernacle. So now we've got this traveling experience of God, this honeymoon suite of a place that is the connection between God and his people. And now he says, like, "You're my brand new bride, and I want you to follow me around in the desert." And so following him around in the desert means, hey, we need to get acquainted with the desert. And so that's what we've been trying to do over the last few weeks. So the first image, do you remember what the first image of desert was? Anybody? The first image in the desert we talked about a shepherd. A shepherd. A shepherd is the first image of the desert. And in the Jewish, there's not anything special to show. Um, the the image that we so readily dismiss, but this image of a shepherd is connected, directly connected in the Jewish culture with desert and barrenness and nothing. And when we really understand how shepherd is connected with the desert, it changes our perspective of some of what God has to say about shepherding and his word. And we looked over Psalm 23 that week. And then the next week, we looked at a couple of trees, which the first one says it's a tree, but it's really not a tree, is it? The rotum is the it's really a bush, yeah. Um, it is when it references when the Bible references shade, most often the word that is translated to shade is rotum. And it is not some abundant big oak tree that casts tons of shade. It is a bush that you got to crawl under to get your shade. Matter of fact, it says that rotum bush is the bush that the broom tree or the broom bush, the rotum. It's what Ishmael was laid under uh, to die when Hagar was left in there to die. She put him under a broom tree, a rotum, which would have been on the side of a rocky hill, and she goes and finds her way about a bow shot away, and she's just we're gonna die here. That's rotum is a great. And then we also interacted with the gift of the desert, the acacia, that looks dead most of the time, but according to Psalm 1, it never ceases. It never fails to bear fruit in season. Then we followed up last week with the Arar. Beautiful, beautiful, colorful, vibrant colored tree with this amazingly heavy, it's like the size of a pomegranate, heavy green fruit, and this beauty in the middle of the desert. You're like, oh, it's so nice, it's so good, and that fruit has to be so good. And when you open the fruit that it produces, it makes a pop sound, and all that's in there is like fibrous nothing. It almost looks like a spider web in the middle of there, right? um, and it has this milky substance that comes out of it. It's hollow and it's poisonous, and it will do nothing but make you sick. Might not kill you, but it definitely makes you sick. And especially in the desert when it's hot and there's no place for extra water and rest and protection, that can definitely be deadly. And the challenge is we get so caught up in what stuff looks like, right? And then the tamarisk, and we asked the question, how many tamarisks have you planted today? How many? The tamarisk tree is it's a luxury tree. It does not grow on its own. It's not natural for it to grow in the desert and in this space. So you've got to take care of it. It takes work. It's blood, sweat, and tears to invest in this tamarisk. Do you remember how long it takes to grow to full maturity? 80 years. So you're not planting a tamarisk you're planting it for the grandchildren. And that's the idea. That's the challenge. Uh, that's the rabbinic tradition of asking, hey, what have you done? What legacy action? What have you done that isn't about you, but it's about future generations? What today have you done that's about future generations? How much planting for future generations, long-term investment are you doing? That's the tamarisk tree. Um, it also is known as a salt oak, a salt cedar, not a salt oak, a salt cedar. And it supposedly takes the moisture out of the air, which there's very little in the desert, but it supposedly brings the moisture out of the air and releases that moisture in its shade. And it's said to have shade that is 15% cooler than other shade trees like it. So few images in the desert that really paint the picture. And it's really hard to have that clear understanding in this setting. Maybe one day we'll just go to the desert and experience it for ourselves. And that's where we're brought to today. Today we're in the last two images, really three kind of images of the desert that we're going to talk about. And when you think of desert, since you're coming this way, right? Here she is. When you think of desert, Chelsea, as you're walking to your mic, I want you to tell me the image that comes to mind when it comes to desert. You're laughing at me? Go ahead.
Oh, I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at the song that popped into my head when I think of desert.
Oh.
No. It's from Aladdin. I just think of Arabian Nights.
Okay. That's
every
good.
time. I think of the desert, I'm going to think of that. Just sand, pyramids. Yeah.
And this would be the desert that the people of Israel would have been familiar with in Egypt.
Yeah.
So you get into the Saharan desert. Is it the Mojave Desert? Is that out west here in America? Yeah. Sand dunes, rolling hills of sand that change. The landscape changes regularly. You get sandstorms.
They have those in Colorado. We never went, but
you get to the top of a dune and you can kind of see a long way, right? It's pretty unobstructed.
Sure. I don't know. Never been.
This is not the desert of Israel. I wanted to bring that up because, well, I think that's our natural instinct of desert. These rolling, dry, parched, all it is sand moving. But what we need to understand is the image that we get in the desert, in the Negev of Israel, of southern Israel, is rocky. It is a rocky desert. And the first one is a wadi.
A wadi, you say?
A wadi, I say.
Wadi, you say?
Yes. So what is the natural climate of this desert area? They have two seasons. One's longer than the other.
I would assume there is a dry season and a wet season.
Okay. Dry season and a rainy season. So what happens in the rainy season?
It rains.
And then what does it do?
It stops raining.
And then what does it do?
It's dry.
It rains again.
Oh, I mean, it rains again.
So when you have, even out here they were doing the construction, and I told you they were going to do something. It was dry. It was summer because it's summer right now, and they just got finished. And they had turned over all of this ground.
Are you talking about right out here?
Yeah, right outside.
Oh, okay.
And when you get a bunch of dirt that is dry and it hasn't rained and there's no vegetation and then it does rain, what happens?
It's mud. It erodes the land.
It erodes the land. Thank you. I don't understand your frustration.
I wasn't frustrated. I just didn't want to give the scientific answer.
It definitely erodes the land. It breaks stuff away. You get mudslides, you get all of these things, and this is exactly what happens in this part of Israel. So over the years, the rains come and it hits the ground, and there's nothing that slows it down. So it just rushes into these low places and fills them up and runs all out. And these are called wadis. And so what do you get? You get this deep, cavernous trails that have rock walls on either side that are very narrow, and you have no sight at all. So where God is leading these people is not in the desert that you're thinking of, that they spread all out on top of this sandy space and they drop their tent and they're like, oh, this stupid sand. Close it up and open it up. No. They are in this rocky, narrow passages that they can see nothing. You can look up and see the sky and the top of the wadi, and you can see rock this way and rock this way, and you're like, where am I? I'm not really sure. You can walk for miles and be completely lost, because all the sides, when you get walking in these wadis, in these trails in the Negev desert in southern Israel, you're lost. You feel completely lost. Like, where in the world are we? Where are we going? And if you're not familiar, if you're not the guide, how does that make you feel, Chelsea?
Vulnerable.
Extremely vulnerable.
Yep.
And if you are the guide, how much information do you feel is necessary to share with the people following along?
I don't know that there is a lot of information to share. I mean, truthfully, what you see is what you get.
Yeah. Hey, we're going this way, and we're going to experience the desert, and we're going to go this direction. And what I need you to do today is I need you to trust me. I need you to trust that I know where I'm going. I have been here before. The terrain changes a little bit, but I know where we're going. And if you'll follow me and make the turns and follow the footsteps that I put in front of you, we're going to get where we intend to go. Well, where do we intend to go? We forward. Yeah, where we intend to find ourselves. And this is an emotional roller coaster. How would our kids deal with this type of environment?
I don't know that we have time to get into that. Some would take it as it is, and others would be emotionally roller coastered with it, and others would complain on the good days and be happy on the bad days, because that's just how they are.
Yes.
And the other one that's this big would say, "Are we there yet?" Because he says it just to be silly in the car. Are we there yet? What about now? What about now? Have we stopped? We're not there.
This would be a tough, if this was our normal everyday life in America, in our American church culture, how would this work?
Where the church is being led by the pastor through a wadi?
A wadi, yeah.
Oh, I don't know that people would come.
This is a really tough thing.
Because too many people now want the control of where they are, how long it takes to get there, what they're doing in the process of that arrival.
How many what do we call them? How many conferences have you been to?
Several. Not any in the last 10 years, but
when you go to a conference, or like, I guess we call it Century Leadership Conference now, but it's District Council. Those type of things.
Oh, well, okay, I've been to lots of those. Yeah.
What do you get when you get there?
What do you mean?
You get a program.
Oh, I was
get
like
an
a name
itinerary.
tag? I don't know.
Right? You get an itinerary of, this is what time we're doing this. This is what time we're doing this.
Here's
this
our
is what
speaker.
This is what time.
Their subject.
This is what time we expect for a lunch break, so you can plan accordingly.
And these are your options.
When you're in the wadi, following along,
and
all the terrain is the same, and you're in the desert, and your tour guide, your leader, hasn't given you a, hey, this is when we're going to stop for lunch at this little restaurant that I know that's, because,
I just know that things were different then.
and a warning
Because the
sign.
modern conveniences were not the same.
Yeah.
And so I know what you're getting at, but it's definitely, that was what they did.
Yeah.
Because they followed the leader in that time. And they trusted them because the leader provided their livelihood.
Well,
And
did
so
they trust him?
they went.
What is that trust? Hey, you've read the book of Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy. How'd they do in the trusting department?
I'm talking about a family. I wasn't talking about all of them. Sorry.
We're experiencing, this is an image.
I was still thinking of Abraham and just his little clan. I wasn't thinking of all of them. But they still went. They griped about it. Like our kids would still go.
Is that obedience and trust, though? Sarah laughed. Yeah. She laughed. It's a true story. Lot argued and went and lived.
I think I have a hard time thinking about it in this way because I haven't stripped away everything that we have now. I'd never lived that life. So I can't truly speak to, you can't truly speak to what they felt, what they did.
Yes, but we can look at the conversations that they had.
And how do we do that?
And we can read the Bible and see that.
I thought you were going to segue into what it said, actually.
And we can read the Bible and understand that they were like a 3-day journey into the wilderness, weren't even to Sinai yet, and they were complaining about water. You've let us out here to die. They hadn't even got to the Red Sea, and their complaint was, you brought us here to die. Like, they were struggling with obedience. They were struggling with trust. And so I think a couple of things here, especially with this image of Wadi and this idea of trust. It's okay to struggle. This is not a judgment. This is just an image. But in our American culture, we expect an itinerary. We expect some type of order of this is what's coming, this is what's happening. We go to college and we expect, before we send our kid to college, we expect a degree plan and an organization of how we go from where we are to where we're going, correct? We got a kid going into freshman year. We have clear explanation of these are the number of credits she needs. This is the areas those credits need to be in so that she can be ready to graduate in 4 years and leave high school and go on to further her education or do whatever else she wants to do to meet those minimum requirements. God, on the other hand, says, hey, if you'll follow me and you'll listen to my word and you'll be obedient to it, then you'll be my treasured possession. And we get so hung up on, if you'll do these 10 things, and we go, well, the 10 commandments, if you'll do this, but it wasn't that. It was I'm leading you somewhere, and this is what you can expect from a relationship with me. And he is taking them into the desert, a desert that they're unfamiliar with, and a terrain that they're unfamiliar with, down paths that they're not familiar with. And he's saying, I need you to trust me and follow me and get to know me. And the only way you can get to know me and learn to trust me is follow me through these wadis where all of the scenery looks the same and you don't know what's coming next. And trust that I have your best interest at heart. And they struggled with it, just like you and I would. And that's why this wadi is such an important visual. That's why it is so important. Do we understand it well? Do we know how to live it well? I don't know. But I know that this is an image of what God's calling us to. This image of Wadi, a limited sight, limited understanding. And he says, I'm going to speak to you, and I'm going to walk ahead of you, and come and follow me. What's wrong? And then he introduces us. Does that make sense? Is there frustration here? I feel like there's tension. This Wadi is this space of God calling us and us understanding, hey, I'm leading you somewhere. And where he's leading us is to, do you remember how to say that? Maim Chaim. I know it looks like Maim Chaim, but it's not. It's Maim Chaim. Maim Chaim. It means living waters. He's leading us to living waters. Did you know that there is a national preserve in the middle of the Negev desert? What? I can't hear you. I still can't hear you. She says no. She didn't know. There is. There is a nature preserve in the middle of the Negev desert. Snakes and scorpions? No, it is not. It's an oasis. It's a spring of water with waterfalls and vegetation, and it finds its space in the middle of one of these wadis. So when I say Maim Chaim and living water, I want to talk about the images of what living water looks like. So for you, what image comes to mind when you hear living water?
I mean, because I've read the Bible, Jesus. But
Okay.
outside of that, I don't really know.
How would something be living water? Something that's constantly flowing? I like that. It's clear, sweet. So water in a place that's surrounded by death or struggle. I like that. Anything else? What about rain? Rain could be a tremendous opportunity of living water. Um, if you've been in a dry and desert place and you finally get water, you've been in a drought, you finally get rain. I mean, that's living water. That's restoring life. That's pretty good. This living water is found in this place called the En Gedi. And the En Gedi is it is the place. It's just the place where Maim Chaim is found, where the living waters are found. And it's also in the desert. When these wadis run out, they come to this flattened out space, and this water collects in this space. And it's where you find most of the vegetation. Remember we talked about the acacia tree? At the end of these wadis, when they flatten out, when the water flattens out and settles down, and the streams of water, troubled waters, settle in, what grows there?
You just said the acacia trees.
The acacia trees, the groves of acacia trees that look dead most of the time. Then they spring to life. In this En Gedi, this place of life, this is where we interact with some of these things in Scripture. So, do you want to read Psalm 63? So let's. Psalm 63 has a heading. I'll read the heading while you're turning there. Is that okay? Or do you want to read the heading?
Go for it.
It says, a psalm of David when he was in the wilderness or desert of Judah. Go ahead.
Are there interruptions, or are you
There will most definitely be interruptions. Go ahead. No, go.
O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. So I have looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and glory. Because your steadfast love is better than life, my lips will praise you. So I will bless you as long as I live. In your name I will lift up my hands. My soul will be satisfied as with fat and rich food, and my mouth will praise you with joyful lips. When I remember you upon my bed and meditate on you in the watches of the night, for you have been my help, and in the shadow of your wings I will sing for joy. My soul clings to you, your right hand upholds me. But those who seek to destroy my life shall go down into the depths of the earth. They shall be given over to the power of the sword. They shall be a portion for jackals. But the king shall rejoice in God. All who swear by him shall exult, for the mouths of liars will be stopped.
Can you imagine what this feels like? Like he is in this desert place where there's no water. It's dry, it's barren, it's hopeless. He feels helpless. Like this is David's declaration to God. But even though I'm in this place where there's no water and I lack, I'll chase after you in the sanctuary. I'll call on your name. Your praise is going to be on my lips. Like this is the Wadi. This is the quiet place. And the thing is, the itineraryless, quiet, helpless, I don't know what to do. I don't know what's coming next. I don't know. But I know what I do have in my hand. I do know what is right in front of me. And I'm going to do what I can do right now. So the thing about the Wadi is you don't know what's 30 feet ahead of you, what's around the next turn, because you can't see it or even perceive it. And you can't even hear it until you're almost right on top of it. And so we hear about these stories about these battles in the Old Testament, and they went up through this pass and they overtook them suddenly at this one place, and we're like, how's that even possible? There's an army and they're in the desert. They can see them coming. Well, no, they can't. They're in these narrow corridors in the dry season where you can't hear anything. And if you're not familiar with the space, you don't know where you're going. You take a wrong turn and you end up right back to the place where you left, completely lost and unprepared. You're stuck. And this is the place that God is trying to lead his people to and through and around. And you're like, how could they wander for 40 years? Well, you wander around 40 years in a place that's a maze. You can do it. All the scenery looks the same. Haven't we been here before? I have definitely seen that rock before. And when David's in this place, probably running for his life, but this wilderness is familiar to him. He's a shepherd. He's a person of the desert. He's a person of the Wadi. He's been wandering and completely unaware of what's to come. And so what do we get? Well, we get this same kind of story in Jeremiah. chapter 2. We talk about this Maim Chaim, this living water. He's looking after something, chasing after something that's going to give life and hope in this barrenness, this hopelessness of there's another turn, and there's another turn. Hey, there's another rock, and there's another rock. Then we get this Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 13. We hear this declaration. For my people have committed two evils. This is God's declaration to Jeremiah. My people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living water. The fountain of Maim Chaim, living water. And instead they've hewed out cisterns for themselves. Broken cisterns that can hold no water. Living water is water that is uncontrollable, but refreshing and more than enough. As soon as we take this living water, this opportunity that God gives to replenish us and continue to provide, and we try to take control of it and control how it goes out and how it comes in and who has access to it and who doesn't, we have left the Wadi that's called us to trust God, and we have put ourselves somewhere else. And this is God's challenge. As soon as we take the water and it's in a place that we control it, it's no longer living water. It's no longer living water. Like, this is a really challenging place because we think of cisterns, and like cisterns here, we dig a big hole in the ground lower than the water table and we brick it around, or we put rocks around it and it's a hole in the ground and we can use it to draw water, put a pump in it. These cisterns in this place, they would have dug a hole until they found their way to the surface water, or collected, like shaped the earth to collect it to a certain point, and they would have built steps that they would have gone down into this cistern and gotten water and drawn it back out. But it would be muddy and nasty and a bunch of foot traffic, and like it's not really clean. You've got to do something to clean it, boil it, something to purify it to actually make it worthwhile. So they have exchanged the freshwater rain. If you catch rainwater, do you have to do anything with it to be able to use it?
I don't know.
Theoretically, no. It's clean. If you have a flowing stream, that's some of the cleanest water you can get your hands on, as long as there's not pollution uphill. But some of the cleanest, purest water in their day that you could get your hands on and you could have access to was flowing water. When water got stagnant, it became far less valuable because you had to do something to purify it. Otherwise, you're potentially getting sick. So these regular springs that are bubbling water out of the ground, these streams that are flowing, and the rain that's falling from the sky are all the representation of living water. And they've exchanged all of this because it was outside of their control with something that they could control. And they built these cisterns to control the water, and now they get this muddy, not pure version of what God's desire was for them. So is God worried about their ability to trust?
Yeah.
He's completely worried about their ability to trust. So if God was worried about this group of people, they're wandering through the desert, and them being established as his people, if he's worried about their ability to trust him, you think he's still concerned about our ability to learn how to trust him? Absolutely. Like, we still struggle with taking the provision of God and managing it so that we can get the best benefit out of it. But most of the time, we're just watering down or soiling the provision that God has for us. And this is the idea of Jeremiah chapter 2. And this is why, go ahead.
And this was people that had seen miracle after miracle, provision after provision.
Yes.
With their own eyes for numerous months, days, years.
That's right. Yeah.
They continued to see the provision of the Lord and still had problems with it.
Yeah.
And yet today in our society that we can't fathom living like that. We can't see that in their time, but we still have problems trusting for his daily provision.
That's right.
We still have problems dealing with the fact that I've got to be in control of this, otherwise I'm not going to have bread for the month.
Right.
No wonder he's worried about it.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a great confession. I mean, these people had walked. They were walking with provision after provision after provision. They didn't go hunt down bread. They didn't go harvest a crop. God provided bread. They didn't go hunt down food. God provided food. He was walking them through this process saying, trust me, trust me, trust me. I'm more than enough. I'm more than enough. And they can only grumble and worry about, well, we don't have water now. Well, we don't have this now. Well, we need shade. Well, we need, and God keeps telling them, hey, trust my voice and trust my way. I'm leading you in the right direction. We are going as right when you need it. The En Gedi, this place that contains the living water, is right there. If you will just trust me and believe without this itinerary of, hey, we're going to stop at this place. Hey, we're going to make this all day. In my family, if we're going to make this all day trip, the first conversation is, okay, how far are we driving until we make our first stop? Where's the plan for our first stop? And my natural reaction is, well, we'll just keep going until we find a place. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. This is not sufficient for the people that I hang out with.
Because then you end up having to stop in the ghetto.
Well,
because you're like, oh goodness, I am out of gas.
Well, there's no chance that I could drive until we got out of gas with the crew that I roll with.
You couldn't handle it very long either. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I mean, how long would it take to get out of gas in our car? Like 8 hours? Can't go 8 hours without stopping.
No.
But it's the basis of an itinerary. Hey, this is how far we're going to go. So how long until we stop? It's going to be another 42 miles. You can handle it. That type of deal. But if you're these people following God in the desert, and this is really like when we understand this revelation of this is the communication of the Old Testament. This is the communication of Torah. The book of Numbers, the book of Deuteronomy. It was God saying, hey, we're going to eventually get to the end of what should be a 12-day journey. It should be about 12 days to walk from Egypt to Israel. 40 years. So I can understand this frustration, but they didn't know that was just 12 days. But what they did know is that God said, I'm going to give you this image of a pillar of cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night that's going to represent my presence. I just want you to follow me. I just want you to get to know me, and I need you to trust me. And if that was the call of God for us today, to walk out this door, and he said, this is the image of my presence. Trust me and follow me. How long can we go? Even if because his statement was, I'm taking you to a land that's flowing with milk and honey. I'm taking you to this land that was promised to your forefathers, And the reality is they didn't know it. They weren't familiar with it. And it's just crazy. Do you know, as we kind of, we're going to shift gears real quick and get to some of these other things so we can kind of wrap up. Do you know the number one cause of death in the desert, in the Wadi? Anybody? Can you guess? Go ahead.
No, I have no idea. I was gonna say they've fallen and they can't get up, and then nobody can find them.
Flooding.
That would not have been my guess.
Flooding. They say if you're in a wadi and you hear the sound of a freight train, you have about 40 seconds to get out. So if you're in a wadi, you hear the sound of a freight train, you're done. That's it. There's no way you can get out. Unless you're at a flat end where you can, it fills up with water and a wall of water is coming. And it's over.
You can't hold your breath and just go under?
You can hold your breath and go under and get smacked off the rocks.
Oh, man.
I mean, that's not going to last long. It's not like getting tumbled by a wave. Like you're getting hit by a straight line wall of water that's rushing down. I mean, that's the number one cause of death in the desert in the Negev is flooding. So it kind of puts in perspective this declaration of Jesus. I was going to talk about Sukkot. Kind of skip that part. But I'll get back to Sukkot. So, number one cause of death is flooding. And it floods in the desert. It floods through where the rocks are, actually. And so, what happens then? How do we deal with Jesus' teaching when he says, if you hear my word and you turn and go and live a different way, you're like a foolish man who builds his house on the sand. And the rains come and the flood comes and the house is gone, is destroyed. But if you hear my words and you are doers of my words, you're like a wise man who builds his house on the rock. How do we put that stuff together? Because we're in the process of building a house. It's very common, extremely common in America and in the area that we live in for that foundation that you pour to actually be poured on sand. Because sand is very porous, it sheds water very well, but it also packs down very, very well. Mm-hmm. You moisten it down, you run your packer over it, and it really packs down as a substance. So, what are we supposed to understand about this then?
I never thought about it like that. I always thought about like literally at the edge of the water on the sand.
But they're not.
Always thought that.
But they're in the desert.
Well, so as a little kid, I always thought they were right by the beach. I don't know. Even if it wasn't the right context. That's what I thought.
So it's really, for us to really understand that teaching of Jesus in terms of what we're talking about here, is location. Are you going to build it in the high place, in the place where the rocks are, because where are the rocks?
On the wall.
On the wall. In the Wadi. The thing is, if you build your house in the Wadi, if you build your life on Christ, and his instruction is to follow him like a sheep follows a shepherd, that he's our shepherd, And he has called these people, he's calling us into the desert, into these wadis to follow him faithfully. That means he's calling us to establish our life in low visibility places where we learn to hear his voice and follow his voice. And trust that he's not leading us to a freight train sound that's going to destroy everything. But that means where we establish our life has the potential for disaster.
Sure.
You ever think about that? He's asked us to build our life on him in a place that most of the people in the desert die there.
That's why it's so hard.
Build your house right here where most people went. Like, this is why I brought up on Sunday the statement to Pastor Darrell. Hey, and the statement that was made to us whenever we were out in Colorado Springs. Hey, Colorado Springs, everybody loves it, but this is a ministry graveyard. This is where ministries go to die. And God says, hey, in this place where people go, and in the rainy season, like, this is the place that you die. Hey, that's the place I want you to put your foundation down. I want you to plant your life right there, trusting me that I've got this, that I'm going to take care of you, that I'm more than enough. Because when the rains come and the Wadi floods, what gets pushed out the end of the Wadi? All the water and sand and all the stuff that's loose and unestablished and mobile. Not the rocks, though. The rocks stay.
We have to understand that Christ is our rock.
Yeah.
Not only a literal rock.
So, it's good stuff. You should join us. We're gonna drop it there, and we're gonna pick up next week on Book of Numbers. A couple of things to review there before we hit the Book of Deuteronomy. As we wrap up Torah, we're gonna wrap up Torah in the next 2 weeks. You should join us because we're about to have a discussion group about this thing called Sukkot. That's really, really interesting. So, love you guys. Come see us Sunday morning, 10:30. It's gonna be great. Amen.